This weekend marks the second for league play in Major League Soccer and the home opener for my beloved Colorado Rapids. Ramadan also begins this Friday, February 28th, marks the first night. Also, next Wednesday is Ash Wednesday and the beginning of the 40-day Christian season of Lent, where similar practices of fasting and generosity are practiced. Well, hello everyone, I'm Rev Brad, and here today on the podcast, I want to share a little bit more about these two significant periods of religious observance, and a little bit about how, as chaplains, we look to serve and support people in the beautiful game during such times. So don't go anywhere, we get going in just a minute.
He's found the space, and he's found the back of the net.
Just a little off foot, thinking he's going to go far post, not strong enough with his right hand.
Whips that one in. Far post, almost made him ends, and they have. He has the hat-trick. The second in his career. The third of the night. The hat-trick hero.
Talked about you're not going to be able to sustain that kind of pressure.
To the corner. Goes towards the near post. And you're the angle, and what a goal! What a goal!
So let me share first about Ramadan. This Saturday, March 1st, marks the first day of Ramadan, the first day of observance. Ramadan is a month-long fast observed by Muslim people. It can last 29 or 30 days. It really depends on the lunar calendar. During this time, adherents of Islam abstain from food, drink, sexual intercourse, and smoking from dawn to dusk. They are also to abstain from evil intentions and actions in a way that's to promote, quote, a life of complete submission to the will of Allah, end quote. Now, in certain parts of the world, the fast of Ramadan can be difficult for those in football, for soccer, especially trying to undertake it here in the U.S. when, here in the beginning of the season, soccer leagues are just beginning, like this year. Sometimes the fast occurs in the middle of summer, and this can be really difficult in places like Colorado and Texas and other states where the heat and humidity can have a massive impact on one's physicality. The drain of the fast and then the demands of the game are really a lot to put on an athlete, to put on a person. So how does Soccer Chaplains United, a Christian organization with Christian chaplains, support athletes and coaches and staff that believe and practice a different religion, such as Islam? Well, let me share some of the ways and maybe a few stories along the way. The first way is club advocacy. One way that myself and our chaplains look for opportunities to serve is really to be advocates for people of different religions during special times like Ramadan. Now, our chaplains are Christian, but we try to help teams and clubs understand the nuances of different religions, and this is really a key role for the chaplain. Coaches or people in certain key roles, like an athletic trainer or medical staff around the club, they may or may not have a particular understanding of different faith requirements. And so part of what we do as chaplains is we help to educate. We provide advocacy about what the typical faith observances may be. Chaplains can also help bring key people within a team together to better understand support and accommodating different people's faith and belief requirements. So sometimes this has to involve a little bit of compromise from a particular person. So as an example, athletes in certain years may have to request an allowance from their imam, the Muslim clergy. And that allowance often allows them to make up part of the fast at different parts of the year, maybe like the off season when jobs and livelihood and other things aren't as severely impacted by the physical demands of the fast. So I recall one time there was a Muslim athlete, and I approached him. I knew he was fairly devout in his faith and his faith expressions, and I asked, "Are you going to observe the fast this year?" To which he replied, "Yes." And I said, "Well, have you spoken to coaches or to the athletic training staff?" "No, I'm afraid to. I'm afraid I'm going to lose my starting job, my position." And so we had a great relationship, a relationship of trust. And I just asked him simply, I said, "Would you mind if I go and try to advocate for you and help support you in this way?" And he didn't hesitate. He said, "Yeah, sure, by all means." So I first went to the athletic trainer. I shared, "Hey, this is what the fast looks like. Here's what the demands are. Here's what the athlete wants to observe." And the athletic trainer said, "Well, this isn't ideal this time of year, but I think we can try to help. We can do something for sure. Next, we went then to the coaches, and the coaches were like, oh my goodness, no way, we have to bench him. So I think the athlete was kind of right to think, oh, this might happen. But with the support of the athletic trainer and myself, and we were able to say like, well, hey, here's what it can look like. Here's how we can develop a plan and support the athlete during this time. And then, of course, the final decision, you've got to keep the needs of the team. If you choose to bench him, okay, but this person played a key role for the team at the time. So at the end of it, it worked out. I actually should go back and see what our record was during that time, but it worked out. And the team didn't really notice a gap or a lapse. And I think the athlete later on was able to make up several days through an allowance in the off season, and it worked to everyone's advantage. So that's just an example of how advocacy works as a chaplain. And what was really neat was at the end of this time, the athlete and I went for a meal, and he asked me, he said, why did you do this? And I said, because I care about you. I love you. And in fact, it's just not even me that loves you. It's really Jesus that loves you. And he said, oh, well, I know about Jesus. Let's talk about Jesus. And we had a wonderful conversation over a meal about Jesus later on. Well, one other thing that we tend to do as chaplains is we help provide individual assessment. Not every person from every faith tradition will observe every aspect of their faith. And so, usually what I find across different faiths is there's different levels of devoutness or observance, and it exists everywhere. For example, a Catholic Christian may observe Ash Wednesday, for example, whereas a certain Protestant Christian believer may not observe Ash Wednesday, may not even know about it. Similarly, a lot of athletes that identify with a particular religious background, well, again, just their levels of devoutness are based on many different things. How they grew up, their culture, sort of their family history and dynamics. And so I find this true for Muslim believers and for Jewish observers, that within these traditions, there's varying levels and degrees of how much they observe their faith. So as a chaplain, it becomes really important to be patient and to understand where an individual may be in terms of their desire to observe or participate in certain practices or traditions of one's faith. Another aspect is the practical provisions. As a chaplain, we may need to help at times provide certain things for people of different faiths so that they can practice their faith as it relates to football, as it relates to soccer. As an example, there's been times I've gone to the club and I say, hey, is there a space or a room at the stadium where we could kind of designate, set it apart for this Muslim athlete who wants to pray and try to observe the 5 times a day that they need to pray? They may get done with a training session and need to go immediately and pray. And so is there a place where we can store a prayer rug for them, or we can set it apart so that they have sort of what they need in terms of privacy? And so the chaplain can help advise on making those provisions. And again, sometimes it's needed, sometimes it's not. Or sometimes there may be dietary restrictions or accommodations. And again, we're helping provide ideas and educate and say, here are some ways that we can help support people in these things. Again, another thing that a chaplain does is we help provide local connections. Especially as a Christian believer, I don't understand and know everything about Islam or about Judaism. And so finding clergy members and communities of support, local faith resources are really helpful. And once you understand an individual's needs or desires, that typically lets you know how you can support them greater or support them better. And so some of what I do as well is work on building relationships with local clergy members, even within the Christian tradition, so that I know here's a Roman Catholic athlete and they really need to have their child baptized and they need to go through the education, or they're looking to get married and the church has certain requirements for before this couple joins together in matrimony. So making sure that I have those relationships is important. And there's times when I've been asked to, hey, what are the local resources? And I might even develop a little resource that can be easily updated and handed on. Finally, I think the last part where a chaplain can support, especially around a differing tradition, is just in terms of personal prayer. I've found that supporting people of different traditions coming alongside of them to personally pray during those important times, the feast, the fast, those faith observance moments, is a simple way to join with someone in something. And so I'd even like to encourage, if you're listening to this podcast, as Ramadan begins, as Ash Wednesday begins, these become places to join in prayer and to say, God, for these athletes as they try to work out their professional commitments and somehow balance, juggle, and work with the convictions that they have around faith, would you just come alongside? Would you show up? Would you intersect their lives in a powerful way? Well, let me talk a little bit about Ash Wednesday quickly. Ash Wednesday, in many ways, doesn't feel as significant from a chaplain advocacy standpoint as something like Ramadan, which I think is a very curious thing to say as a Christian person, as a Christian chaplain. But I find this largely true in soccer for a few reasons. I want to share those with you. First, I mentioned it. Ash Wednesday is not observed by all Christian traditions and denominations. And it isn't required in the same manner. I'm kind of doing my quotes with fingers. In the same manner that Ramadan is with Islam. In fact, sometimes I encounter Christian people who simply comment, you know what, Ash Wednesday isn't in the Bible, so it's not for me. I'm not going to observe it. I don't even think it's right. And some even go further and they think, oh man, this is a pagan thing. This isn't even Christian. And I try to remind people in those moments that, simply Ash Wednesday is marking out a period of 40 days, the season of Lent, and it's 40 days before Easter. This has historically been used by the church in preparing people, educating them about the Christian faith and making them ready for baptism on Easter Sunday. But usually naivety and dismissal win out over my ability to educate and convince. So let that be as it is. Additionally, too, I think a struggle is that the Eastern Church, the Orthodox Christians, have an entirely different calendar and observance, and so sometimes Easter and Lent don't even align at the same time. However, this year it does. Yay! Now, secondly, I think because Lent isn't strictly observed or required, it often means that the disciplines that are practiced and observed aren't as strict either. So, for example, a devout Christian may fast certain types of food, certain meals of the day, or for even longer periods of time, but the fast is always balanced by Sundays, and Sunday is designed to be a perpetual celebration of Jesus' resurrection. So, I don't know if this helps or hurts Christian practices of discipline during the season, but in my personal experience, it tends to be easier to forget or slip up in someone's commitment or their practices of fasting or generosity or giving of service and help during this time. Finally, related to the nature of Lent versus Ramadan, because Lent isn't always observed and because the practices are kind of lesser or not as strict to a degree, the impact of it, let's say, in a dietary fast, usually those aren't as impactful for the Christian athlete. And so while an athlete may fast maybe lunch, or maybe they're fasting certain meats or types of food on a certain day, it usually doesn't have as much of an impact to the athlete's physiology as Ramadan may be, when food and drink are fasted from dawn to dusk. And again, where that lands in the particular time of year, there's certain lengths of the day that has an impact. So nevertheless, Lent and its beginning day of Ash Wednesday, I believe, are still important for Christian people to observe, whether you're an athlete, a coach, or a staffer in the beautiful game, because it helps to create space for something different. It helps us to break free of things that have enslaved us. As an example, I think fasting from our smartphones and screens for longer periods is helpful for our mental and spiritual health, and primarily for our relationship with God. When we take a break from endless scrolling and replace it with Bible reading and prayer, there's a powerful thing that can begin happening in our lives. The challenge with both Lent and Ramadan often is in the timing of these significant periods of observance. There's so much going on that I think it feels like we can't break from the demands of soccer and the industry and our work in it. And we can feel foolish sometimes or irresponsible. And sometimes we might feel like, oh, am I playing the religious card somehow and being unfair to my colleagues, my coworkers in this space? And again, as a chaplain, I think this is a space that we have to step into, we have to lean into, because this becomes some of the prophetic voice and work that we have to do to support people. Not everyone needs or desires such support, but the work of educating, advocating, supporting, and even joining or coming alongside of people in these periods of time are significant moments that God can use. Well, friends, as we wrap up today, if you're in soccer, you're with a club or a team, and you are a person of faith, I encourage you to reach out and help. If you don't have a chaplain, or if you just need that extra voice of advocacy, I just want to encourage you to reach out to us. If you feel like there's too much pressure to try and observe what you feel called to observe, look for that chaplain to step in. Look for someone to come alongside you in this moment. And during these times, I pray that the pilgrimage of faith that is made would be blessed by God. May you encounter him powerfully in these times of fasting, in these times of journeying closer and closer to him. Well, friends, allow me to close out with this journey blessing from Carmina Gadalica, simply entitled, The Pilgrim's Aiding. God be with thee in every pass. Jesus be with thee on every hill. Spirit be with thee on every stream, headland and ridge and lawn. Each sea and land, each moor and meadow, each lying down, each rising up. In the trough of the waves, on the crest of the billows, each step of the journey thou goest. Amen. Blessings to you, friends. This is Rev Brad coming to you from the Touchline.